Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics, reaching you live from our global headquarters here in the nation's commercial nerve center, Lagos. I'm Jeffrey Uzama. Here's what's coming up on the program right now. Retired police officers stormed the nation's capital to demand for several months of unpaid pensions and gratuity. They want to exit the contributory pension scheme. And organized labor again gives the federal government to the end of the month to reverse electricity tariff hike or face action following an increase for Band A customers. And the Attorney General of the Federation faults the poor remuneration for judicial officers whose salaries have not been reviewed in the last 17 years. Welcome again to the program where we'll track the polity at midday, and we'll begin with a story that just came in from Plateau State, where no fewer than 40 persons have reportedly been killed by bandits in two villages of Zurak, Kompani, and Bandalana in Bashara district of Wase local government area of the state. That's in the north-central region. According to accounts of some residents who spoke to Channels Television on the phone, the attacks on the villages occurred on Monday night when residents were returning from the day's work. The bandits are said to have attacked the villages, simultaneously setting houses on fire, leading to pandemonium in which some of the residents were killed and some others sustained injuries. Over 30 persons were reportedly killed in Kompani, Zurak, while another 10 were killed in Bandalala, with several others still missing at the moment. So that's the latest we're getting from Plateau State, where this incident occurred late last night. Those are visuals from the nation's capital. We can tell you that for not getting their transaction alert as expected, retired police officers of Nigeria under the contributory pension scheme are protesting over several months of unpaid pensions. The retired officers who came from different states of the Federation are lamenting the untold hardship being suffered by their members over the failure of the Pension Commission, that's PENCOM, to pay them their entitlement. Those who serve the nation are also unhappy about unpaid gratuity. The retired personnel are asking the federal government to remove them from the contributory pension scheme forthwith. In the meantime, the nation may as well be bracing up for any possible action by organized labor, who are asking the federal government to conclude all negotiations regarding the new minimum wage before the end of the month. That's this May, to avert industrial action. The Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress have also asked the National Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, to immediately reverse the recent hike of electricity tariff by the end of the month. A joint statement by the presidents of the two unions criticized the federal government for unduly delaying the negotiation for a new minimum wage. The unions also mandated their members in states who have been owed the current 30,000 naira minimum wage to gear up for industrial action. So you can see loads of issues around welfare and wages preoccupy the polity. Let's take the conversation around what's happening in the judiciary, where the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Mr. Lateef Fagbemi, has also faulted what he terms neglect in the remuneration of judicial officers for close to 17 years. According to the minister, this situation is against any meaningful judicial reform. He stated this during a public hearing by the Senate Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters on the advancement of the welfare of judiciary and the need to salvage the sector.
A public hearing by the Senate Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters, seeking to review the salaries, allowances and fringe benefits of judicial officers in the country. This is sequel to the passage into second reading of the executive bill transmitted by President Bola Tinubu to the upper chamber in March 2024.
This bill as it is before us now doesn't take care of the pensions and gratuities of judicial officers when they retire. And laws are supposed to be organic documents that change with the changing nature of society, I think is sine qua non to upholding a very fair-minded and independent judiciary.
The National Judicial Council recommends a 300% raise in the salary of judicial officers. This position is supported by Ministers of Justice and Finance, who elevates the urgent need to escalate efforts towards upscaling the officials' remuneration to salvage the sector.
The present day but sad reality is that the judiciary has stagnated on the same salary scale for over 16 years. The instant NJC proposal for 300% increase was informed by the prevailing economic realities of increasing headlines and core inflationary trends, putting in place an enabling working environment that engenders professional development and efficiency for judicial officers.
I cannot but follow him in commending this bill and requesting its swift passage to the benefit of the judiciary in particular and Nigerians in general.
Other legal luminaries believe the bill is a progressive legal framework that can significantly foster the rule of law, the functionality and independence of the sector.
First is the recognition that the administration of salaries and conditions of service of judicial officers should not be lumped together with that of other public or political office holders. We should therefore not leave the judiciary at the mercy of the unpredictability of a future executive and legislative arms of government.
Even the daily running of the courts is an issue. We are almost closing down some of our courts for want of resources to manage. We do not only want to leave the emergency ward, we also want to leave the ward completely.
The outcome of this public hearing is expected to be presented on the floor of the upper chamber for eventual approval and passage. Now, at the core of the demands of the judiciary is that, given the harsh economic climate, their salaries are able to keep pace with the rising cost of living, such that Nigerians most critically do not continue to suffer from the consequences of a deprived judiciary. From the National Assembly, Gloria Umezuke, Channels Television News.
I don't know about you, but it was quite painful to hear the president of the Court of Appeals say that they're almost closing down some courts due to some basic needs, and it's just not acceptable, and which is why this conversation had to be raised at the Senate. Now, in the meantime, a former chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, Professor Chidi Odinkalo, believes a holistic review of remuneration for judicial officers will be more sustainable. Professor Odinkalo explains that any percentage increase in the remuneration for judges without doing same for other judicial officers could hinder smooth running of the judicial system. He spoke on our program, Politics Today.
Why do we think that everything has to start from judicial dispute resolution when administrative process is not functioning? Because when the administrative process functions, one, you reduce the load on the judiciary itself. Number two, you reduce the need for judges to be sitting every time, and the caseload they have, therefore, is reduced. Number three, you also make the judicial system more efficient. So, administrative justice is important. The political system and its functionality is very critical, but we don't want to prioritize those, nor do we want to prioritize the lower down. We are just picking up judges. And if you ask me, this is settlement. This is politicians settling the people through whom they now control the political system. And they realize that the people no longer matter. Our votes no longer matter. And therefore, they can casualize the people in this conversation. That is what, in my view, is being reflected here. That the legitimacy, the mandate of politicians is increasingly residing in the hands of judiciary or judges, and therefore those are the people whom they are prioritizing. This is judges and politicians involved in a quid pro quo that casualizes the people. We have to be careful about this.
Well, a word for the wise from the legal luminary there. Let's stay with the issue of the judiciary, and against the backdrop of numerous allegations of misconduct against judicial officers. The Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Olukayode Ariwola, is warning that the country's judicial system will no longer tolerate such behavior. He gave the warning at the opening of a two-day workshop for High Court and Appeal Court judges or justices in Abuja. The workshop aims to review the judicial proceedings of various petitions arising from the 2023 general election.
We have been treated to an unpalatable cocktail of misleadings and conflicting judgments, as well as frivolous interlocutory orders emanating from courts of coordinate jurisdictions, which attempt to make a mockery of our judicial system. This is largely an embarrassment to our jurisprudence, and we will not take it lying low at all. Any judicial officer who conducts himself in a manner that is considered unbecoming of a judicial officer will not only be shown the way out, but will equally be made to face the consequences of his actions.
All right, that's Chief Justice of Nigeria speaking very some tough words there. But let's get to the very first conversation, or the conversation for the day. We're being joined on the program by the House Chairman, House Committee on ICT and Cybersecurity, Mr. Adedeji Olajide. He joins us via Zoom from the United States. Honorable Olajide, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, very well. And let's begin. I know that this may not necessarily be your forte. I'm not sure because you're Chairman House on ICT, Committee on ICT and Cyber Security, which is why we are having this conversation, given what has played out in the last few days. But I needed your quick take on what played out at the Senate yesterday on the issue of remuneration for judicial officers. I'm sure you heard the news, or you listened to the news. What's your first impression, given what you heard that 17 years down the line, their salaries have not been reviewed?
Well, good morning again. I am Honorable Adedeji Stanley Olajide, House of Rep member representing Ibadan Northwest Southwest Federal Constituency of Oyo State, House Committee Chairman for Digital Information Communication Technology. First of all, let me say this. A lot of things have been said about the remuneration of our judges. I'm in agreement, I'm in alignment that we need to review this and also and just make it be at par with international standards, because that is when we can uphold the justice or the rule of law in Nigeria. Because if we are going to have a high expectation of our judges, their remuneration should be at par with their counterparts all around the world. So let me just put it at that. Right now, there's a huge gap, and that gap needs to be closed.
And so just before we let off on this particular issue of the wages or the remuneration or salaries of judicial officers, at minimum, where should we be looking at, especially for not necessarily the judges or the justices of the Supreme Court and Court of Appeal?
Well, look, I can't sit here and pretend to know exactly what their different levels are. I know a lot of our judges, they have different years of experience, and they all sit on different benches. So depending on what is the recommendation of the different parastatals that are in control of setting, I think is the Accountant General office where they set this salary grades. I think we should just defer to them to make the right recommendations, and we should follow suit.
All right, let's come to the issue, which is your forte, which is why we brought you on for this, Mr. Olajide, on this particular one. And recently, we saw the outcry of Nigerians concerning the cybersecurity levy that was NSA directed that this should be implemented, and then the central bank also, who is statutorily the money is supposed to be domiciled with them, and then wrote to banks to begin to do this deduction, apart from about 16 or so transactions, and Nigerians rose to the occasion to say this is not acceptable. Now, you're a member of the House of the 10th Assembly. In your view, what was the wisdom in passing that provision in that piece of legislation?
Well, thank you. Let me just, first of all, set some clarity around. I don't think we need to even go further into why we need our cybersecurity laws. You know, doing business on the in the digital space is very, very dangerous. And there need to be frameworks and security frameworks in how things are done. And all of these things, anytime you talk about information technology, yes, you're talking about money to implement, money to enforce, and actually money to continue to make the environment very safe. The future of our democracy, our economy, our children. We need not even stress that. Very important that we take control of what goes on in our cyberspace. However, when I look at we have issues, very simple. If you take 1 million, you multiply by 0.05, automatically gives you 0.005, which is 5,000. But if you go ahead and if you do the percentage, I meant, go ahead and multiply by 0.05, you'll give 500. You don't do the percentage and then do the multiplication together. It's either or. If you do 0.5%, it gives you 0.005 by default. It's 5,000. 5,000 is 0.51 million. Okay, that percentage. But if you go by 0.5, it gives you 500,000. Very clearly, this cybersecurity levy have nothing to do with our citizens. It have nothing to do with the working class. This is purely a corporate exercise, okay? It's going after the banks and it's going after big corporate organizations to actually support, because cybersecurity, I mean, today, I can tell you for free, a lot of our banks are getting hacked and we know nothing about them. A lot of our citizens are losing a lot of money in our financial institutions, and we need to get our hands around that. So the Office of the National Security Advisor, National Orientation, and the Attorney General need to come to the table and set the record straight around the interpretation of this law, which I think is where the interpretation is where the issue is. The law is very clear. It has nothing to do with our citizens. It is not meant to create any unnecessary hardship for our people. What it's meant to do is to get the corporate organizations to act responsibly and also contribute into making sure that our cybersecurity spaces are safe for conducting business. Again, there's a lot of...
Just if I may butt in,
sure,
because of time, so we can take as much as possible, because it was quite disturbing to see that this was put on citizens, and this would have clearly been antithetical to the issue of financial inclusion. And we're wondering whether some people had to read that legislation properly to know what to interpret. But we're happy it's been suspended. The CBN has given the directive for it to be suspended, at least for now. But let me come to you. You mentioned something in passing which I want to drill further, which is the issue of citizens losing money and banks being hacked. How much of oversight is your community doing to make sure that citizens are protected as much as possible? Recently, we heard, I think, one of the actors, Shan George, crying over money, about 3-point-something million, but it was recovered later. But we have people who we're not that lucky. What are you doing to protect the citizens from the point of legislation?
To look into all these cybersecurity issues and the vulnerabilities and the loopholes of the banks. But in some cases, some of the financial institutions have actually gone to court to say the National Assembly does not have the right to look into their infrastructure, to look at the security controls that they have in place. Again, we as law-abiding citizens, we are, following all the judicial steps and to make sure that we take down that veil so that we can look and see how many of our banks are acting responsibly and how many of them are actually just hiding under the veil of the court to not do the right thing. It's work in progress. Definitely, we are looking at all of the different financial institutions, looking at all the controls, the security controls that they have in place to make sure that our citizens are protected in our financial institution and in this industry at large.
Let's go to some strategic scorecard before we let you go, because the network, I'm not sure, is really allowing us to have a very smooth conversation. So let's take the ones we can take. I know that the Ministry of Communication had come out with a strategic blueprint, and they are looking at some level of, say, 5 billion naira yearly funding for some of this startup, maybe around to like 2027. How well do you think they've been able to perform by your assessment as the people's eyes and voice?
Well, I'm not sure I've seen the proposal you're referring to. Something I have not seen. I'm not sure I've seen the blueprint that you're referring to. When, then we can look into see if they're actually enough and adequate to protect citizens moving forward.
Mr. Lajide, can you hear me? All right, Mr. Lajide, if you can hear me, we can barely hear anything you're saying, but I think what I heard, if I stand to be corrected, is say you've not seen it, but it's actually the ministry is what they call the strategic blueprint, and it calls it accelerating our collective prosperity through technical efficiency. They are looking at some level of $5 billion yearly in funding round for some of these startups. That is a dream besides all other elements. But it will be important you get your hands on that document, given the role you play in the National Assembly. But in closing, if you may, just a quick one. Has the 10th Assembly lived up to the expectation of Nigerians in holding the executive to account?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
When you say yes, what do you mean by yes?
I think it looks like there's a feedback coming back from. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I wasn't hearing you, but you can just round off your thoughts.
To the best of my knowledge, that is by right on playing that legislative agenda, and even where we have actually earmarked some areas where interaction in a lot of the oversight and the interaction.
Oh dear, we sincerely apologize to all our audience watching because, as you can see, glitches, connection issues rather. I don't know from what end, but I was speaking with the chairman of House Committee on Digital and Communication Technology and Cybersecurity, Mr. Adedeji Olajide, who joined us from the United States. We hope we are going to have him at later dates for a smoother conversation. But let's move on now to other issues. That Justice Benjamin Nyako of the Federal High Court has dismissed a request by the leader of the proscribed indigenous people of Biafra, Mr. Nnamdi Kanu, to restore his revoked bail and transfer him from the Department of State Services to a house arrest or prison. Our correspondent, Emmanuel Akele, witnessed the proceedings, reports.
The detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Mr. Nnamdi Kanu, is received by friends and family members as he arrives to court for the ruling on his application to be transferred from the custody of the Department of State Services to Kuje Prison, as well as his fresh bail application. However, the trial judge, Justice Benjamin Nyako, dismissed his application, stating that Mr. Kanu had earlier jumped the bail granted him and escaped out of the country. Justice Nyako added that the sureties who stood for him in the earlier bail had applied to be discharged and had been discharged on the ground that they could not locate Kanu and did not know his whereabouts. The judge also disagreed with Mr. Kanu's lead counsel that the Supreme Court held that the earlier bail granted him ought not to have been revoked, adding that she had perused the Supreme Court's judgment and did not see the claim of the lawyer. Shortly after the ruling, a visibly angry Nnamdi Kanu berated counsel to the federal government, Mr. Adeboyega Awomolo, for allegedly perpetrating an act of illegality in the bid to prosecute him, insisting that no court in Nigeria can try him.
Section 2, subsection 3F of Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act. That's what it says. Any court considered to try me is committed an act of terrorism. Yes. Very clear. You cannot violate a treaty that Nigeria entered into and then come to try that very person. Is not done anywhere in the world. So you must be aware of that. So that is why there is all these ridiculous delays. That is what Supreme Court said. I did not jump bail. My home was invaded. They came to kill me and I survived. They came to Kenya to kidnap me, brought me back to this country and seeking to try me, which the law says cannot happen.
His counsel speaks after the day's proceedings.
What led to all these problems is the refusal of the court to obey or implement, for want of a better word, to implement the ruling of the Supreme Court that Mazi Nnamdi Kanu never jumped bail, that he was driven into exile by the actions of the prosecution, and therefore the ruling by the court that a jumped bail shouldn't have been made. So, ordinarily, we expected that this court would have just followed suit by restoring his bail, but it didn't happen. So now the court that's not what the Supreme Court said. So we're going to look at that. We're going to go home as a legal team and ruminate over this and come out with a legal response to this anomaly.
The case has been adjourned to June 19th for trial. Emanuela Ekele, Channels Television News.
And just before we wrap up the program, let's head to Rivers Politics, where the Victor Okojombo-led House of Assembly is to screen, or maybe be screening right now, additional 8 nominees for position as commissioners in the Rivers State Executive Council. The nominees were forwarded by Governor Siminalayi Fubara as part of his ongoing effort to strengthen his administration. The screening marks the second exercise to be conducted under the Okojombo leadership. The first, which took place last week, saw the successful screening and confirmation of Mr. Dagogo Iboroma, a senior advocate of Nigeria, as the Commissioner for Justice and Attorney General of the state. Meanwhile, the civil society group, the Center for Credible Leadership and Citizens Awareness, is asking the members of the Rivers State House of Assembly to adjourn indefinitely due to the inability to form a quorum. Addressing a news conference in Abuja, the Director General of the Center, Mr. Gabriel Nwambo, says it is unconstitutional for a 3-member or 3-man assembly to legislate for the entire state. And that's it on the program. Thank you so much for your time and, of course, your usual company. I'm Jeffrey Uzongo. You've been served on Lunchtime Politics.